First thing first, can you like introduce yourself for the audience?
Yep. How you doing? My name is Ryan Bellerose. I'm the sports science coordinator with the Carolina Panthers.
Love it. So we talked before. How exactly do you get into like the return to play?
Yeah. So what we were talking about before is kind of I got into this kind of in a roundabout way, more or less. I was a young strength coach, kind of trying to break into the field. A lot of times when you're at like bigger programs, the young guys end up taking on return to play just because the guy isn't on the rack. So you're in more of a one-on-one setting. So it kind of started with just like, hey, just take this guy. He can only do dumbbell bench today. Cool. And then over time, it just, being there, gaining trust from the strength and conditioning coaches I was working with. Hey, take him through this. And then just kind of like being a fly on the wall day in and day out of like trying to learn, asking more questions, continuing to grow. And then it's, hey, can I take so and so through his stuff today? Yeah. And then, as injuries ramp up and there's a lot of guys, it's like, hey, actually, will you just take him? He's doing this on hamstring. Cool. And then as I gained trust and did it longer, I kind of took over my own crew. Then I had my own guys. And then as I was at South Carolina for 5 years. By my second year, I was return to play. I was the guy to kind of do return to play with a couple different guys helping. Um, and it was an interesting experience because like as we were talking about before, I didn't know sports science when I first started out, but as I kind of did return to play, it was like, what am I really returning this guy to? Like you say that so and so is good to go back to practice, but like what does that mean? Because from what I've seen, he has not done enough to go back to practice. We have no way of quantifying this, even though we have all this catapult data that can quantify it. So then I just was like, I need to understand sports science better. So then that became like, let's learn catapult. We had a catapult guy named Eric. So I sat with him and just asked him a million questions like, hey, what does this look like? What do you expect to see? What should I be seeing? What is a typical practice? And then he would explain that. And I was like, well, that's what I need to do in return to play. So I just kept playing that game of how do I go back? And then just taking strength and conditioning principles and applying them to the return to play of, hey, this is where I want the guy to be at the end. Great. Let's work backwards. If I have 6 weeks to get him there, what ramps can I take? And like I've used Tim Gabbard's stuff a lot over the years. So it's, obviously in return to play, it's tough. It's not always going to be, a 30% increase or a 20% increase. Sometimes it's going to be bigger, but also they did have a chronic load, especially if they just have a soft tissue injury. It's not like it's just gone magically and they can't do things anymore. So where you start them and where they go is relative to each person. If it's a surgery, it's a much longer time frame. But if it's just going to be 2 weeks, like I don't need to panic about the whole thing. I can chip away and just work my way up, get an increase, but then make sure that when I get him back to practice, he's not going to go somewhere he hasn't been in return to play. So like one of the things like I really believe John Griffin actually is at the LA Rams. One thing he always said to me was guys get hurt when they go somewhere new. So if they go somewhere new in practice and I didn't prepare them for that in return to play, then it's my fault because I should have got them ready. Now, unforeseen circumstances can happen, but I should do everything I can to check those boxes along the way.
I love the mindset. I love the mindset. So, um, going from return to play, and you mentioned like all catapult or like sport techs. Um, let's start from GPS data. So, in football, in your world, I work with basketball, but in your world, like what kind of metrics do you guys track? No matter it's like return to play or it's just like all the data I track.
Yeah, so I mean, it's if you've ever looked at a catapult printout, you know that it is vast, right? Like there are a million different data points to look at. It can definitely become overwhelming to coaches. So I think the biggest thing is like, and my boss Andrew Althoff always says this of like, you need to do a great job of cutting down as much of the trees along the way so that they can actually see what they're trying to see. So like, I'm not going to give them the massive printout with every single thing on the CSV file, right? Like we boil it down. So the thing we look at is we'll look at player load, Excel load, explosive movements, high speed yards above 75 and 90%, max speed, max Excel, max decel. And I mean, those are the things that are on our everyday report. Now, in the background, there's other things happening that we're looking at. There's other metrics that we'll pull out for just return to play. But just on our everyday report that the coaches are going to see, those are the number one key points we hit home. It also helps because the sport coach doesn't need to know everything, right? But we need to educate them enough that they understand, like, hey, this guy has a 700 player load. That's bad. That's not what we want. Now, it's okay if it's just today and we can pull it back for the next couple of days, but he needs to have context to what they are. If I give him too many numbers and he has no context, like I can be like, so and so had a 1300 Excel load. He could just smile and nod his head, like, not good. I need him to know, like, hey, our D line had a 1300 Excel load in Indy period. That's too high. Let's pull it back. So I think that's one of the biggest things of like, take the metrics, cut them down, keep it simple, keep it short, and make sure you explain it.
Nice. So yeah, keep going.
No, next I'll let you roll for there.
Okay. So how is it different for a guy who like like we mentioned, like return to play? How's the are you gonna track different metrics for them? Let's say like ACL injury or hamstring strain.
Yeah. So where it changes for us, especially for return to play, is we track reps at practice. So everything these guys do, we break it down to reps. So if you've seen catapult before, right? Like you'll make your periods. So when we walk out on the field, it's a walkthrough period. So we can get that data from each position group and we'll put that off to the side, right? So it's walkthrough, it's team warm up. From team warm up, it's special teams. From special teams, it's to Indy. From Indy, it might be to a 7-on-7 or a team period, and then it's team periods for the rest of practice. So every position group is different, especially in football. So we'll take all of those periods, we'll pull them out, and for each position group, we'll make a rep profile. So I have all their data from the day. I have the full day in one pile, and then off to the side, I have all the team periods. So I know on average how much a guy, so like for instance, like a corner is going to have like a 174 player load up through the last Indy period before we get to team periods. So if I know that for a fact, I know what his, like the two biggest things that we'll work on, especially with return to play, because you asked the question about like capacity metrics, right? Like the two biggest things that we use is player load and Excel load for that. So we'll take the two of those. We've found the Excel load has been the biggest indicator of injury for us. So we take those two and I boil it down and I know what we're going to be at once we're through Indy. And then now I take the team reps and I divide it by everything they've done player load wise. So then I can get it to, hey, every rep this guy takes, if he's a wideout, is going to be 10 to 17 player load per rep. And it's going to be around a 50 Excel load and he's going to get this many high speed yards for every one of these reps. So then as I'm developing his return to play, I know what I need to get him to. But let's say, to your point, let's say it's a hamstring injury and we've only had him for 2 weeks. Well, I don't want him to go back to where he got hurt, right? Like, especially in 2 weeks, like I might not get him there. But I do know that based on what he's done in return to play, he could handle 12 reps because I've done the math. He has about 120 player loads left and he has around 500 Excel load left. So cool. He can handle that. I trust him to handle that. We're good with it. So he's going to do 12 reps. This is the math behind it. If you want to see it, if you don't want to see it, it's 12 reps and that's cool. And it's easy for a football coach because I don't want to jog up to a coach and be like, hey, so-and-so has 55 yards left today. Like, that's not going to go over well. It's going to be a really hard conversation of like, hey, tell him to stop walking around. Like, no, I do the math beforehand. We go out there. He's got 12 reps. And then if they're like, what if he doesn't do Indy today? Great. So now I go back into the rep profile. I pull the Indy out. So whatever the player load is for the Indy, let's just say it's 50 for simple math. Pull 50 out, pull the Excel load out. And then, okay, so now he can take 14 to 16 reps. And I feel good about that. And then you're live tracking all at the same time. So let's say, again, we stick with a wideout. Let's say it's him and he gets 3 fade balls in a row. So it's like, hey, I know I said it was 12 reps, but after those 3 fade balls, we're going a little hotter than we want. It's probably going to be closer to 9. Or vice versa, like, hey, we ran 3 screens and 2 run plays. He's not there. Like, he can handle 6 extra reps today. I'm good with that. Because I'm just trying to keep him within the metrics that we've prepared him for in the return to play. Um, and then continuing to answer your question, I know it's kind of a roundabout way of like, what else do we look at? So then on Catapult, we have other dashboards built out for the return to play. So we'll prepare them for the worst case scenario of every single position. Like that's our number one goal. So what does that look like? It's like, what is his max Excel? We need to make sure we get there early on in the return to play. Depending on what the injury is, like that's a box that will be checked. And then it's high speed yards. We need to get him up above 90% before we put him back on the field. So then we got to check that box. Then it's total high speed yards above 75%. So just total volume above 75% of his personal top speed. So we need to get him within a bandwidth. Now, where that gets tricky, it's if it is a special teams guy, that number could be 20 to 40% higher than a traditional position player. So if that's what he is, then I need to get that number up above 200. For instance, like our gunners will see at max 512 to 550 yards above 75% on game day. So that guy needs a special return to play window because I can't just give him 190% exposure and say he's good to go and play on the game day. He's going to end up seeing too big of a spike. He'll just be back with me injured. So we like these are all boxes that we'll check along the way. And then the thing that Tom and I have been working on a ton this past year is what is the maximum effort that they're exposed to above 90% on game day? So it's not just can he hit 90%, it's can he maintain 90% for 30 yards, 40 yards. If he has to cover a fade ball and on average he's covering 22 yards, I need to expose him to that in return to play before I let him do it on a game.
Nice, nice. I like it. Man, I take notes. I'm taking notes out of it. So, just like probably like the question I asked. So it's kind of like normally if it's not return to play, you check like peak metrics
Mhm.
and player load and number Excel. But if it's return to play athletes, you're more gonna uh check their capacity side of metrics. Am I right?
No, so that's where I feel like for both of them, I'm still tracking the same metrics. It's return to play. I will get significantly deeper into the weeds of it. And I will look at, for instance, like let me pull up one of them right on the side of my computer. Like I'll look at, so a couple things that will look at difference. I'll look at their explosive movements, and then I'll look at the bands of their explosive movements. So Catapult has different bands for everything. Like it's depending on how you set it up. There's high speed bands, there's explosive movements bands, um, there's IMA bands. I just call IMAs explosive movements, but you'll break it down into those things. And then there's bands for yardage, right? Like we have our setup is there's bands for band two yardage for us is above 50%. Band three is above 75%. Band four is above 90%. Anything else is band one below 50%. So like we'll total all of those yardages, and those will be boxes that we have to check along the way. And like the peak metrics, we're still looking at because he needs to hit his max excel. He needs to hit his max decel. He needs to hit his top speeds. Like all of those things are still going to be tracked along the way. I'm just going to go deeper into the weeds to make sure, especially if it's a long-term return to play. Like if we're thinking an ACL, we had one this past year. Like every single one of those capacity metrics, we'll say, has to be checked along the way. But that doesn't mean that I can miss the intensity or the peak metrics, right? Because he's still going to get hurt. Like the volume is what's going to kill you, but also I can't prepare him for all this volume, and then he has to go somewhere for game day, and he's not ready for that. Then he's gonna be just as crushed. And then it's going to depend on the position group and the guy. Like if it's a big boy, I got to pay attention to accel load. Why? Because he's 300 plus pounds. Those calves are going to go under a ton of stress with all the XL decel work. So like, I'm going to pay attention. I don't want to see big spikes in accel load because I know he's going to have lower limb stiffness and soreness. Well, you can get away with that on a couple of days, but I can't return him to practice if we have that on consequence days or subsequent days. Excuse me.
Cool. So, you also mentioned like you guys use Babbitt's like what's the name of it?
Acute to chronic.
Yeah, acute to chronic workload ratio. How would you implement it?
So if it's a long-term return to play, we'll go from wherever we start him at, and then we'll build it from there. And we'll try to keep our spikes within a relative like 20 to 30% window for the weekly volume. And we'll try to do it within sessions as well. This is where we bleed multiple methodologies into one thing. So I'm not sure. Have you ever heard of the system by like Rob Panarello, Coach Parker, Coach Miller? Have you ever heard that before? The book?
No, no, no.
So the system is it's kind of like old Russian and Soviet text. It's a way of programming. So we will basically take what we put into that, and if we're training 4 days a week, there's different percents that we'll hit for each day. So we'll find what our total volume is for the week, and then for the 4 days, we'll break it down. So it'll be like 24%, 32%, 28%, and 18%. So each day will have a different amount of volume set to that day. Now we can do that from a player load standpoint. We can do it from an Excel load standpoint. You can do it from a distance standpoint. It just all depends on what the injury is and what you're kind of working on. This past year, we had an O lineman. We were doing an ACL rehab, and we did it from a player load standpoint. So we knew what the total volume was for the week. We knew we had to be prepared for up to 4 practices in a week, and then a game day spike. So, or 3 practices, then the game day spike for the fourth day. So we broke down what it was that we were going to get him to at the end of the 10th month. So once we knew what that was, we just worked all the way backwards. And it was, okay, we're going to have anywhere from a 10 to a 30% spike on each week. We're going to break our days down into these days. So our down day is going to be around 18%. Our big day is going to be around 32%. Now, obviously, we're not going to have big days on back to back. So it might be an Excel or a lead in day, could be a 24% day. We could have a high speed yards day as an 28% day. We could back it off and do a now download day of an 18% day, and then a big capacity day of a 32% day, which would be like his game day spike. That way, like there's highs and lows within the week, but then we'll take those numbers and we'll apply it to the month. So then there's highs and lows within the month. So then, like, for instance, like his 32% week is going to be his hardest week, and he's going to have his hardest day on that week. Once we get through that every time, then we reevaluate the program. Then we know for the next month, hey, we can increase by this percent and we feel comfortable about it. Or, hey, he had way too much soreness, his knee swelled up, like, let's either run it back or, hey, we missed, it's too much. But it's great because we have numbers on it all. So it's like, hey, how much did we miss by? This is the day where he had the soreness. Great. This is what we were at that point from a player load standpoint. Okay, what does it look like? Let's go in the Excel load. Did we end up going up too high? Yeah, we did. Okay, so we got to pull back. What drills were we doing on that day? And what's great about Catapult is like every drill, if you've profiled it, you can get those numbers. So it's like, hey, let's pull out this drill gave us way too much Excel load. So let's pull that out and let's put something else in, and then we'll move on from there.
No, I think the reason why I asked a lot of stuff about return to play is I work with basketball, but and in basketball, like we got tons of return to play. I think football has like more, right?
Yeah.
So probably all the athletes needs return to play.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's a little tricked up at some point.
Yeah. So I know some maybe young coaches love the sexy part of strength and conditioning, like power outputs, numbers, velocity, whatever that is. But how do you feel about like working with return to play?
Yeah, for me, it's my favorite. We said this offline, but it's like I'm solving a puzzle every day, right? Like you come in, and now for us, like Tom Barbeau is the guy. He is hands-on with every single athlete. I'm much more, I would say, like a backseat driver to the conversation. Like him, on our strength staff, like so Jeremy Scott and Corey Miller, like they are the ones who are hands-on. I'm more running the numbers on the back end. I'll come in and help if there's ever a time where they're overflowed or anything like that. But for me, it's much more back burner. But it's great because they can tell us like what they're seeing because I'm out at practice for the most part when they're inside. So they can say what they're seeing, and then I get to go to the computer and I get to look at the numbers and say like, hey, we're seeing this, or hey, he's going to need more of this. And it helps us kind of audit each other because they can say like, hey, I thought I got him here today. And I can go back, pull it up and be like, hey, so we were 10% low today. So we're going to need to push that a little bit more. Or, hey, we were a little bit high today. I know tomorrow was supposed to be this. We should pull back. And they can say like, hey, no, you know what? I was with him today. He had no soreness. It was actually a great day. Let's not pull back yet. Let's get through the warm up tomorrow and then let's make our decision. Right. But it's like it creates a checks and balances system of like, hey, I see this, the numbers say this, you saw this, let's put it all together. All of us can make this decision together. And now it's an informed decision along the way of, hey, do we want to push? No, we don't. Or what time of year are we in? It's like, especially for us, return to play in the off season. I mean, that's a pretty easy job, right? Like we are just preparing them for OTAs. It's just practices. Like we have plenty of time. When we're in the season, like this point of time, like it is significantly different because it's, I need to know, can he go right now? Decisions are going to be made. Like that's not like we're not front office people, so we don't have to make the hard decision, but we have to make sure that we're prepared in case a hard decision is made. So if this guy were to play tomorrow, what do we feel like he is comfortable to do? And then that helps because I'm now solving the puzzle of, hey, we've gotten him to this point. They want him to play today. He's checked all of these boxes along the way, but we haven't had time to develop a bigger work capacity window. With that being said, how many reps could he play on game day? And then that's what's great about having these rep profiles is then you can just do the math out and say like, hey, he'd be good. Like I have one sitting in front of me right now. Like, hey, he would be good for 36 reps. If he did like anywhere from 36 to 43 reps, we would probably see anywhere from a 15 to 20% jump. If he goes past 46 to 48 reps, like we're kind of in the danger zone. That's going to be around a 30% spike. I'm not saying that he's going to get hurt. I'm saying that at some point we are going to pay for this decision. Now, I don't know if we're going to pay for it in 2 weeks. I don't know if we're going to pay for it Wednesday morning. I don't know when we're going to pay for it, but we definitely took out more money than we had in the bank account. So at some point, we got to find a way to reinvest the money. So whether it's like, hey, he's going to practice less next week. Hey, we're going to do regen with him. He's a great guy. Like he's getting the soft tissue work. Let's get him with the chiro. Like, let's check his core. Let's check the pelvis. What does that look like? How is he positioning? How does he feel? Let's ask him more questions. Those are the things that we then have to do. So it's return to play to me is a blast. Like the sexy stuff, I get what you're saying, all the power output. That's cool. The return to play is significantly more fun because it's I'm with the player, you're developing a relationship, you're trying to solve this puzzle. You know they want to play. And so, like, what is a better reward to you than helping this guy make sure that he can continue playing the game that he loves?
Yeah, yeah, love it. So, all those conversations you make with no matter it's coaches, no matter it's like Thomas, other strength coaches, how is that? Um, is it sometimes is the conversation sometimes going to be hard? And
Yeah.
how are you going to prepare for that?
Well, so what's great about my role is my boss, Andrew Altoff, he's the one who has to go upstairs. So sometimes I can get to be a bit of an idea fairy and have like some great ideas. And then I get to give it to him to go up to the big coaches and have those conversations. Sometimes I get to as well, but he's the one who ultimately has to say it. So like if I'm gonna say it, I better be sure about what I'm gonna say because I know I'm not always the one that has to have the conversation. So if I really am confident in something, I gotta explain it well and I gotta be willing to put my chin on the line in case we get hit for it. I think at this level, some of the funnest conversations are with the athletes. And there's a lot of guys who love football. So like there's some guys who like when you have to limit them at practice because of whatever it is, whatever they're dealing with, or in a return to play, like it's going to be interesting. And we're dealing with a guy right now who loves ball. He does not want to be limited at all. But we have him on a rep count because he's come back from an injury. And so we tell him like, hey, let's say you have 16 today. And he's like, no, I'm doing all of them. You're like, no, you're doing 16. And you just try to educate him. And no, I'm doing all of the reps. So then, like, okay, going to practice, like, I'm going to have to argue with him, which is fine. Like, I love that. I have no problem with like, hey, this guy wants to practice. It's a great problem to have. But it's like, then you also keep a note in the back of your head, like, hey, if we get to 16 and we pull him and he suddenly isn't arguing with me anymore, like, okay, there's probably a little more to the story. What rep did any rep particular get him? Did he have to chase something? Did he make a weird cut? Like there could be more to the story. Maybe he is a little more sore than he thought. So maybe we got out there and it didn't feel great. Like good. So like keep it in the back of your head. Like you're always taking notes, whether you're writing them down or you're doing it subconsciously, or vice versa. You go to pull him and he's like, nah, coach, I'm staying. I'm staying. Like, great problems to have. Still pull him because I want you to feel great tomorrow and I don't want to feel bad by the end of the day. Like, let's still be successful, but keep it in the back of your head, like, whatever it was today, once we download it or once we get over to the computer, like, he was prepared for that. He handled it well. We'll see how he feels in the morning from a soreness level, but we know, like, hey, today was a successful day. Keep that in the back of your head. Keep moving. But yes, some of those conversations here it's a little different because I kind of work through. For instance, a year ago or 2 years ago when I was at Vanderbilt, I was the one having those conversations. Significantly harder at times. Sometimes it's a coach along the lines of, "What do you mean so and so can't practice? What do you mean they can't do this?" What? And you're like, "Well, coach, like he's hurt. He's got this going on. Like we need to do this and this." No, no, no. He needs to practice today. Like, okay, so he can practice today, but he is going to get hurt if he practices. And then you're saying he's going to get hurt today. I'm not saying he's going to get hurt today. I'm saying at some point he is going to get hurt. Like this thing that we have going on right now, it is a bit of a problem. But then to me, that's where again, it's still a good problem to have, right? Like they care, they want their guys to play. So now like I got to figure out how do I relate to this coach? Like what is he like doing? And then I got to make an analogy along those lines of like, hey, would you do blank? Or, we always laugh like there's different analogies. The one I've used a lot with coaches is like if I have to use a beer analogy, like, hey, you like drinking beer. Sure, let's say this coach drinks beer. Okay, you only drink 5 beers every time you drink. Yep. So you wouldn't go and randomly drink 20 beers. And they're like, yeah, I would feel terrible the next morning. Like, okay, this guy just drank 20 beers at practice yesterday. He's going to feel really bad today. So the last thing we need to do is have him drink another 20 beers because at some point this hangover is really going to catch up and he's not going to be okay to practice. And then, oh, okay, I get it. I get it. So like, okay, so when we go out there today, if he just has 2 beers, we'll be in a much better spot. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. You know what I mean? So like now like it's a little funny, it's a little bit of humor. He might laugh a little bit. It takes the edge off of what I'm saying. Now me and him are on the same page. And like forever, he'll be like, "Oh, I just can't have them drink 20 beers today." And you're like, "Yes, that's all I need you to remember." Cool, you understand.
Nice. I like it. I like it. The other thing I want to discuss about is like it's before we start recording is like you said we always need to prepare our athlete for the worst case scenario, right?
Mhm.
So how mm, like what gave you this kind of mindset? Because I love this. I love the way you think. So what gave you this kind of mindset and to like prepare all those things?
Yeah. So I think it's a couple things, right? Like, we've all watched football games, right? And like you see that crazy play, or you see the kick return for a touchdown, or you see a punt return for a touchdown, or you see a couple weeks ago on like a Thursday night, DK Metcalf, right? He catches a 75-yard touchdown. He goes 22 miles an hour across the field. So like you see those plays and you think in your head, like, that's a really cool play. Of course it is. The way my brain works is I'm watching that and I'm thinking like there is a D lineman on the field who potentially just sprinted 75 yards trying to catch him. Now, that is taking this to the extreme, but like that's the way my brain works in the sense of like, was he prepared for that? And if he wasn't, that means like now that guy just got 50 high speed yards. He potentially just got a new max mile per hour because he's chasing somebody down and it's Thursday night football on national television, right? Like it's all this stuff. So that just happened. He's now going to go out there and he's going to play again because they're going to get the ball back. So in the next 10 minutes, he's back on the field. Now, if I haven't prepared him for that, if I haven't given him some max speed and some max yardage exposure, something bad's most likely going to happen. So that's kind of like you see it all the time and you think like, oh, this is this great play. But if a guy's not prepared for that, there is a problem that's going to happen. Like there's something that's going to come from it. So the last thing you want to do is you see it happen and then you're standing on the sideline thinking like, well, he wasn't ready for that. And now what are we going to do? Because it's not like I'm going to walk over to the coach in the middle of the game and be like, hey, excuse me, sir. Number 22, he can't go back in on this next play. He's going to be really tired and sore. That's not going to work for me. So I better make sure in return to play or in whatever we've done, I've prepared him for that. So I'm not sitting on the sideline like, hey, over here, this is bad. This is going to end bad.
Man, I love this. Love this. So, um, for want to go back to like sports science or like all those sport techs in your role, like
Mhm.
what is there like or like what sport techs you guys use?
So I'll be honest with you, we're in an interesting position where so Andy Baltoff is our director of human performance, and he's been doing this for I don't know, 10 plus years. He was one of the first people to use Catapult back at Baylor way back in the day. So he's like, I would say he's kind of ahead of it. He's been ahead of his time for a long time. So because of that, we're able to do a lot more because he kind of gives us the wherewithal because he's done a good amount of it where he's like, hey, you guys think that's cool? Let's do it. Let's implement it. So I think the easiest way to explain it is I have like a chart in front of me and I'll just read off like what we do on a daily basis and what gets used. So Mondays for us, we'll use force plates. We'll do a counter movement jump. So we'll do 3 reps of the counter movement jump. We'll do a Nord board for 3 reps. We'll do thermo humans, so thermal imaging of the body. We'll take pictures of everyone who took 40 plus snaps. So that's every Monday that'll happen. And then Tuesday is just kind of like our optional day. That's actually the day, like today, for instance, Tuesday. That's the day where we'll update all of the rep profiles. We'll update all of our flagging systems and we'll kind of start our week off on the right foot. Tomorrow, so Wednesday, we'll have catapult. And so that is basically tracking external load. And then we have first beat, so heart rate for internal load tracking. We'll use groin bar in their lift, so that'll get done. We'll take another thermohuman image for everyone who took 40 plus snaps. We've used Omega Wave in the past for CNS and DNS potential. We have not used as much this year with the new coaching staff, but on high priority cases or guys who we think might be overly parasympathetic or sympathetic, we'll use it. In the off season, we'll use the force plate to do an iso mid thigh pull. In season, depending on what part we're at, we'll pull that out. Thursdays, we'll use catapult and first beat again. Fridays, catapult and first beat. And Fridays, Wednesdays, we'll also use gym aware for all our, weight room tracking. And then Saturdays is walkthrough days, so nothing crazy. Sundays, NFL owns the data, so it's Zebra and NGS. And then we'll pull that down Monday morning and make it into our catapult reporting.
Nice, nice. So for for all those data, all those sport techs, how do how do you guys handle it? And like how how did the athletes handle it? Because I mean, it's our job to like I'm not gonna it's we're strength coaches, we're sports scientists. It's our job to handle these job, but handle these data. But how did the athletes handle? I mean, there's gonna be times that it's gonna be overwhelming for those athletes. Especially, I
Yeah.
mean, a new guy came from college and go to pro setting.
Yes. It is it like that is where one, like you have to rely on having a great relationship with everyone you work with. Two, that's where the education piece matters the most. So like integration of any technology doesn't happen without education. So before we roll out any new piece of equipment or any new thing we want to do, one, we better understand it really well and we better be able to use it and demonstrate it in front of the athletes. Like you cannot be afraid to do that. Two, you better make sure the athletes understand it. So if that means like you take some time out of a team meeting just to give them an idea of like, this is what we're doing, this is the structure. And then you have to also explain to them like, what is the why? Why are we doing this? Like, for instance, doing a Nord board on a Monday after they played in a game, that's not anybody's favorite thing to do. I'm not going to pretend like anyone wants to do that. But if I explain to them, like, hey, this eccentric exposure is going to help you with hamstring injuries and strains, it's also going to give me an idea to see what's going on with the soft tissue. This is what I'll use. Like, we have a soft tissue flagging system. If you pop up on the system, I know like, hey, this guy needs some soft tissue work. He might be a guy who's like, hey, we need to pull down his volume at practice. And then I can kind of start to make these decisions based on the members in front of me. And then I'll use this information to go to the coaches and say, like, hey, this is why I think we need to pull down on this guy. It's not that he's lazy. It's not that he's done anything wrong. He's actually doing a great job. He might have done a little bit too much. We need to pull down on it. Now there's the other side of the athletes who are like, hey, I don't want you to use that stuff. I don't want anybody to know. Okay, cool. Like again, use your relationships, get them to understand why you're doing it. You're not using it against them. If they really feel a certain way, like I need to figure out, okay, cool. I'm not going to do that. I need to have a different conversation to get to the same outcome, which is protecting you from maybe you or maybe from practice. and I just need to continue kind of working through what does that look like? Like, hey, maybe I need to know like he takes every other rep. Maybe it's we're gonna pull back in the weight room. Maybe it's he's gonna be my priority list on massage this week. Like it's gonna be different things, but all these things I'm gonna use for you. I'm not using it against you, it's for you. If they understand that, I haven't had any issues. Some of the veteran guys aren't always going to be as into it. Some of them are going to have their own opinions and beliefs, and some of them, just being honest, like they might actually have a reason and something might have happened. If you have a 13-year vet in the NFL, like success leaves clues. Like there's a couple things he's done along the way that's kept him there for 13 years. Like instead of me forcing him to do a test, I might just ask him like, "Hey, what do you do? Why do you do it that way? Like teach me. You've been doing this for 13 years. I haven't been in the NFL for 13 years. Like I'd love to hear what you've done, why you've done it that way." And now, like, versus me coming in and be like, it has to be my way. Like, no, it doesn't have to be my way. He's been doing it his way for 13 years. Like, there might be a different way to do it. Cool, let's learn. Like, and then while he educates me, it gives me a chance to learn. And then over time, he's going to appreciate that. He might ask me questions along the lines like, "Hey, so you talked about those in the beginning of the year. Why do we do them?" Then I explain it to him. Then before you know it, he's like, "Hey, I'd actually like to try those." Great. This is a great conversation. I learned and he learned.
Nice. Is there like, is there a certain situation that maybe you guys use, I mean, you try to like communicate with the coaches, but maybe the coaches didn't buy and still want the athlete to like um run more, do more reps, and maybe the athlete's upset about it? Is there a certain situation like this?
Honestly, we haven't had that issue too often. We have had a couple guys that is it's really cool when you work with it's really fun working with professionals, I'll say, because these guys do understand that they need to be prepared for certain things. So back to our worst case scenario, right? Like if we have a guy who is playing a lot of scout team and he's a special teams guy, like he might be exposed to the high velocity yards, so he may get that done. But there is a chance he'll play linebacker. So if he like this happened this past year where he came to us and said like, "Hey, I know I'm getting all my scout team reps, so I know my high speed yards is up, and you guys have explained that that's important. But do I have enough of the other metrics where if I had to play a full game at linebacker, I'd be okay?" That's the best conversation anyone's ever asked me. It's like, "Hey, let me pull up all your stuff. We have your rep profile. I'm going to graph you against the position's norms." And it's like, "Hey, just so you know, you're actually about 20% down." And then he's like, "What could I do to fix that?" And it's like, "You could take this many more reps every practice, and we would get this number up to this range, and you would be within the median, within a standard deviation above and below it. Where if we got to game day and you started at linebacker, I would not have to panic." And they're immediately like, "This makes sense. This is cool. I'll do this." Because I'm not adding conditioning, right? Like I'm not punishing him. He wants to know, what do I need to do to play a full NFL football game at the linebacker position? These are the things that we need to make sure you have done. And they're going to do that because no one wants to be injured. And this is their livelihood. This is their job. So if it's like, "Hey, I just need to do 5 more reps every practice or 20 more reps at practice," they're willing to do those things as long as you explain why is this important.
Nice, nice, man. It's a different world. Basketball, football, are a different world.
It's a very different world. That's what when we talked about that before, I would love to learn more about the basketball world because that is not my world.
We'll talk it. We'll discuss about it. So, just for conclusion of like what we discuss, um, because I need to learn more about catapult. I need to learn more about the data. So just for conclusion, can you like I know we talked it before, but can you like uh walk us through again like what are those metrics you track like every day and what are those metrics you track
Mhm.
for return play? I know we discussed this before, but just for conclusion.
No, no, you're good. Yeah. Yeah, I jump around. I get excited, I'm not gonna lie. So for us, the big I guess the big capacity metrics that we look at would be player load and Excel load, and then high speed yards above 75%. What we have found is that Excel load especially has been one of our biggest factors in injuries. So paying attention to the accel load and the spikes in it is really important. Player load is a great metric, especially when it comes to capacity, because distance is one of the biggest factors in player load. So due to that, like, distance is going to be factored into it. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for a handful of things. And then if we go into like the peak metrics, at that point, it's going to be my max mile per hour, my max accel, my max decel, and then the IMA high would be a great metric to look at. And that would be peak explosive movements out of practice. So those would be the big ones to look at. And then for return to play, I think the most of the things that you need to look at is taking those metrics and then just breaking them down into their smaller parts. So a high player load, a low player load, a high accel, a low accel, decel, and then going through all the bands of the high speed yards. And then I just break those out. And then those would be the number one things that you got to just make sure that as I'm going along, I'm checking every box and I'm making sure like this position group is going to get exposed to this. Normally, the way I think of it being important is you take the median plus one standard deviation. That's the worst case scenario for each position group. And then that is what I'm now going to prepare each guy for as I'm building them back into a practice. Because if they go to practice and they end up just getting exposed to the median, this is great. I prepared them for more than that. I know that they can handle it. If I do the opposite and I only prepare them for the median and they get exposed to a bigger day, now I'm going to have to be nervous. I'm going to now need to pull back.
Nice, nice, nice. Thanks. So, um, now like you work with all those data, you work at a pro sport environment. Like, what is the next thing you want to learn? Like maybe to help your career, or like what's the next goal for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest things I have to do is I have to get better at coding. I have to learn how to code. I don't even need to get better. I've taken a couple classes, but I'm not there yet. I think that's probably the number one thing I got to get going, just because we work with so much data, and I don't think you can get caught behind the computer for too long, because I think you miss all the nuances of the day. And if I'm too busy sitting at my computer, then I have no idea what's really happening out on the floor, out at practice. And I can't do my job without those things. Like the number one thing that I think has helped me in the past year is counting reps at practice. Now, it's to your point earlier, like, is that a sexy job to hold a tablet and count reps at practice? Like, no, it is not a sexy job. But I'll tell you what, I understand what we're doing every day significantly better than I have in the past. I know what everyone's doing throughout the day, which helps. And it also just it gives you the ability to be significantly more dialed in. Because now I've watched, let's say number 5 is a return to play guy. He's got 12 reps at practice. So now I'm watching every single one of his reps. I'm very locked into his reps. So I know rep 1 was a fade ball, rep 2 was a crossing route, rep 3 was a screen, rep 5 was a run. He took a rest for reps 6 through 8. So those reps obviously don't count. He got 2 minutes off. And now I can run a stopwatch off to the side. So now I know like what are the peak demands that he needs to be prepared for. On average, he did 5 plays in a row. Like that has all come about because I get to go to practice and count these reps. So now I can kind of see like how is he responding to them? Like, hey, rep 15, he started looking like he was limping a little bit. Okay, does he need to go to 20 tomorrow? He absolutely does not need to go to 20. 15 is great. I assume he's going to be a little sore. We might think about pulling him back down to 12. And then if someone were to ask you why, it's I'm paying attention, I can say, well, at rep 15, he started to hobble around a little bit. On rep 14, he covered this route. It looked like this. When he put his foot in the ground, he wasn't able to get it back out. So X muscle group is not good enough yet. This is something we're going to keep working on in return play. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just that ability to be locked in. So going all the way back, long-winded answer. I need to get better at coding so I can do those things better. And what do I want to do next? I really don't know. I wish I had a great answer. I think someday I'd love to be a director. Um, I don't think that day is tomorrow. I think at some point I'll want to do that. I think right now I'm enjoying the kind of role I'm in. I work with great guys. I know you've talked to Tom, but there's a bunch of other great guys that we work with and I can bounce ideas off of. I love that part of it. I get to I like to wake up, listen, for instance, I listened to your podcast with Coach Joey this morning, and I'm laughing because like we don't, I've talked to Joey a handful of times in the past, but we have very similar methodologies, even though we haven't talked as much. But it's listening to him, like I'm still stealing ideas and I can go implement them still. And that's the part I love right now is like, cool, that's a great idea. How can I apply it? Let me get to the drawing board. Tom walks in. I have 3 ideas I want to talk to him about. He pulls me over to the view motion. Now we're having a back and forth about someone's running mechanics. Like that's currently what I love doing.
Man, I need to get both of you on. Man. And one thing I love like talking to you and learn, like I really learned from like um what you said is like even as your role as sports scientist, you need to look at that all those data, you still like learn the sport. You
Yes.
still learn how the athlete move. And that's very important. I love that.
Yeah, because it's funny, right? Like we all of us get caught in a lot of different things. And for instance, like what's sexy right now, like max mile per hour is super sexy, right? Like everybody's talking about it. But yet what I learned from doing catapult and working on all those other things, like acceleration is cool, but the guy who puts on the brakes the fastest is normally the guy who's open the most often. So like we're over here talking about like this guy who runs super fast. That's really cool. But I also know that there's a couple guys over here that might not hit 20 very often, but they catch significantly more balls and they're wide open all the time. So it's like, great. Do you think they need to run really fast? I agree sometimes, but also this guy who snaps the brakes on the fastest is the one. If he doesn't have the kinematic ability to put the brakes on, that's probably not going to matter. So like all those top end mechanics, yes, I agree, but I better understand how to teach him how to decel better because that's really what matters.
I like it. I like it. That's basically all the question I have for you today. Um, Shout out to Thomas for helping me put up this. I'm definitely gonna invite you on again. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you? Where can they find you?
I think my Twitter would be best. Hold on, I don't actually. I think you can say this better than anyone. I'm terrible on my socials. I don't check things too often. Um, it's Coach underscore Bellerose, Bellerose. Reach out to me anytime. If you hit me on there, like I'll send you my phone number, call, text, whatever. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'll check that much more often than I will anything else.
Thanks, man. Love it.
Appreciate it.